Good afternoon, evening, morning, everybody. Good to see you all back again. What was I going to say? Oh, yes, Martin's going to say something first about the Friends of the TSF, which is where we ask you to send us money. Do that in a second, but don't forget that we have a Broadside Day, all-day conference coming up on the 12th of February. Very cheap for a conference, it's only, I think, £10, somewhere around that. That's on the 12th of February. Go to the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library site to book, vwml.org. And the papers this year, I mean, it's always about street literature and cheap print, but we're particularly strong on the song and ballad side this year. So if you're interested in that, please join us.
Steve, is the program on the EFDSS website?
I think it is. If it isn't, I'll be putting it on Trad Song within a day or so. I've got the last abstract in today from somebody who shall be nameless, but he's down there.
It might even be on the next newsletter then.
Yeah, yes, hope so. Our next TSF Zoom meeting is in a fortnight's time on the 6th of February. And we've got Doc Rowe, Margaret Bennett, and Chris Sullivan. And it's interesting. I'm glad we got Chris Sullivan because he's the first one we've got from Australia. I don't think we've ever had anybody Australian before. It'll probably be the middle of the night for him. Anyway, so that's 6th of February is the next Zoom meeting. Martin going to say something about Friends of TSF before we start.
Okay, thank you, Steve. When we moved away from a subscription model in 2018, we thought we'd give people the chance to make a donation, small or large, to the organisation. And we've been delighted with the way that has worked. We hoped originally that if 10% of people who belonged to our mailing list gave something, we could probably manage okay. In fact, we've certainly achieved 10%, and this year it looks even higher because we've got 33 people out of our membership of 260 who've contributed so far. And we've already raised over £1,000, which takes care of our operating expenses for the year. But we have been building up money in the bank over the last few years. So what this means is that we can look at more project work as well. Well, certainly the bursaries will continue. One thing you might like to know is if you happen to know any people under 30, there aren't many of them in this organisation, we like to offer bursaries for people under 30 to attend events. So there are 2 bursaries on offer for the Broadside Day, covering the cost of the event. If you know any of these younger people who might like to attend, do get in touch with us. We'll be doing something similar, although probably a larger amount, for our conference in June, to make sure that at least a couple of people get over to Limerick for that conference. But as we start to build up our reserve, we can consider projects of different kinds, and we're very open to suggestions from members, and they don't have to be under 30, although we love to hear suggestions from younger people, of projects that are in line with our aims, that a little financial support might be a help for. So if you have anything in mind where you need a bit of money and it looks like something we might support, do ask. We're very willing to consider any proposition like that, because we're not all as rich as we used to be. So thank you, and particularly thanks to all the friends who've given so far. It's not compulsory, but we always welcome donations towards our activities. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Martin. send money to Martin if you want to go into the proper account. Well, look at the website, or you can send it to me and I'll spend it quietly and I won't tell anybody. But moving on, right, so today we have, we're going to Northern Ireland and England and Scotland. Probably the first time we've managed to get 3 different countries all in one day. So we're going to Sarah first. She's going to tell us about Sam Henry collection.
Hi, I'll just share a screen here.
That's good.
Do you know, hold on 2 seconds. I'm just going to do it again because I've realized. Oh no, it's okay.
While you're doing that, let me remind people that the session is being recorded. So if you don't want your face or your voice to appear, turn yourself off. Otherwise, you'll be there on YouTube forever.
Sorry, this is coming on now. Of course, this worked perfectly in practice.
Yes, it did.
How typical. Okay, that should be me.
We're not getting
There we
anything.
go. Right, that's me now, I think. Yes?
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, sorry about that, everybody. So thank you very much for inviting me along today. I'm going to talk about the Sam Henry collection. And I'm going to start with a disclaimer and say that I know very little about traditional music. I'm the museum officer with Causeway Coast and Glens Borough Council. And as Steve said, we're based in Northern Ireland, up in the top, the north coast of Northern Ireland, up at the top. So Aquarium Museum, Sam Henry collection is part of Aquarium Museum. It was donated in 2010, donated in 2011, loaned in 2010. So Aquarium Museum is one of 5 accredited museums within the Causeway Coast and Glens Museum Service. Now, Aquarium Museum is quite different from your normal museum in that we don't actually have a permanent museum, and we use Corian Town Hall for temporary exhibitions. This seemed appropriate because our last big exhibition in 2019, before the COVID pandemic, was actually a Sam Henry exhibition. And I just thought I'd show you a couple of photographs from it, especially because Gordon Craig is up on the top right photograph there. That's Sam Henry's grandson who donated the collection to us. And he's been such a big supporter of all the work that we've done. So as I said, the collection was loaned to us in 2010, and then it was donated in 2011. So in 2010, I got a phone call from Gordon Craig, and he asked me to come to his house and have a look at his grandfather's collection. Now, I knew very little about Sam and had to very quickly Google him and sound like I knew something. But I went up to the house, and this is what I saw when I went in. There was just boxes upon boxes of stuff. There was papers, there was books, there was Sam's diaries, his wonderful photograph collection. Papers, there were songs, there was print material and lots of different things, as well as you can see there his field glasses. There were scrapbooks of cuttings, there was his cameras, which really interested me. But what I found really interesting about the collection, seeing it in this state, was all the stories that ran through. And John Walden, who's going to say a little bit later, he had documented and looked at the collection in the 80s. John, keep me right on this. And he had said that Sam was motivated by his love of people. And that was one of the very first things I picked up. And I saw this running throughout because Sam left these sort of complete stories of people. So you didn't just find a song that they donated, you might find a letter from them, you might find a photograph of them, and it just, for us, just creates this lovely story and makes the collection about so much more than just Sam himself. So that bottom picture is just Gordon officially handing the collection over to the museum in 2011 with the Mayor Maurice Bradley. So who was Sam? He was born in Corian in 1878. He's best known as a folklorist and recognised for his Songs of the People series that ran in the Northern Constitution, which was a local newspaper, between 1923 and 1939. He worked as a pensions and excise officer, and this is how he collected a lot of his songs. His daughter Olive, who you can see pictured there with Sam and with Mimi and Sam's wife, referred to his tin whistle as a gadget, and that he would have taken that into elderly people's homes whenever he was going in to assess them for a pension and used it as common ground. So sort of a way in, he would have asked people if they knew any old songs. And in that way, then he would have collected some of the songs and just put people at ease. Obviously, with an official person going in to homes in the country, all over the country, they might not exactly welcome him in, but the tin whistle and the songs, that connection helped. So I mentioned Songs to the People. It was the biggest collection of folk songs collected in the interwar period in Ulster. So it was a weekly series that ran in the Northern Constitution. And it published songs known, played and sang by people in Northern Ireland. And Sam, you can see throughout the collection, he was really keen that the songs were sang. And John can maybe talk a little bit more about this because I don't know a lot about it. But the songs you can see there on Bonnie Portrush, they were printed in tonic solfa. And as far as I understand, that's how children were taught to sing at school at that time. So that means that people obviously would have been able to pick that up, understand it, and be able to sing the songs and know the tune. So the collection includes over 1,000 songs and over 600 named singers. And for me, it's the named singers that's really interesting as well. Sam always printed a couple of lines about how the song was collected, where it came from, if it had been passed down through families and that sort of thing. And that to me is always what's been really interesting. I've also put up there the Songs to the People book, which I'm sure some of you will recognise. So it wasn't until 1990 that the collection was published as a book, and John was involved in that as well. So I mentioned the photographs, and I love all the old photographs within the collection. We know Sam bought his first camera in 1906 because we have his diary, and in his diary he actually records receiving the camera. So we know all his photographs date from then. This photograph is Sam with Harriet Brownlow. And she was known as a singer, and you can see him there with his notebook, and we presume he's probably taken down some lyrics or a tune from Harriet Brownlow. So we've lots of printed and typewritten notes within the collection. So I suppose mostly Sam would have gone out with his notebook and then typed things up, and that's what he's kept, rather than the notebooks themselves. We do have some lovely handwritten notes as well, which are really, really important, and we recognise his writing from his diaries. I love this one and how it was collected. So as I mentioned, most songs were printed with a few lines about how they were collected. And this one was from Charlie Frill. And he whistled a tune over the hedge and left his wife with the horses at the plough. Now this photograph isn't Charlie Frill, but it's horses ploughing. So I thought it was appropriate to put it in, but I just love that image that conjures up. This is a really interesting one as well. And I think this actually was John talked about this the first time I heard about it. And then we found this lovely letter within the collection from Mrs. John Roe McNeill. So Sam actually struck up a bargain with Mrs. John Roe McNeill that in return for 10 songs, he would get her a new kettle. And then this is the letter of thanks from Mrs. John Roe McNeill to Sam. Now, we were doing a bit of research because Sam broadcasts on the radio, and I'll talk about that in a little minute as well. And I have tried to find a recording of Sam and haven't been able to. So I got in touch with the BBC and they'd sent me this one instead. And it has a real nice little bit that talks about the person, Jack McBride, that went out with Sam on this visit to collect songs. So I'm going to play it now.
She made us tea.
Jack McBride, Glenn's man and journalist, reveals how Sam Henry, with its innate knowledge and sympathy, could win so much music from his neighbours.
Sam asked me would I come with him to go around by Glendon because it was a district he didn't think had been covered beforehand. We went up to this house and I remember it was during the war and things were sort of tight. And Sam went into the house and he asked this lady, would she mind telling him a few stories? And she said no, she would. So Sam was all delighted and she made us tea. Anyway, she started to hum when she was, you know, the way they over the fire and taking the crook out and all that and lifting the pot off. And she started to hum, and Sam's ears perked up. He says, "What is that? Do you know the words to that?" "I do indeed," she. "Every word of it." "I mind it well. I got it from my granda." "Well," Sam says, "would you mind singing it for me?" "Aye, surely." And here Sam has the book out and he's noting down all the time in tonic sol for the music. But at the finish, she says, "Do you know, sir, there's one thing I'm terrible annoyed about." "And what would that be?" says she. She imagine me giving you a tea made in an old black pot," she says, "instead of a decent kettle." She says, "And I've been trying down in Cushendall and there's nobody seems to have one at all, and even tried in Ballymena and they hadn't any." "Ah," Sam says, "your problem's solved." He says, "I have a brother-in-law up in Coleraine, and if he hasn't got one, there's not one in the whole British Isles." So about a week or 10 days after that, Mrs. McNeil got a beautiful kettle. There wasn't a like it, she said, in the whole glen.
So there you go. Like, Jack tells that much better than I ever could. So I just thought it was a lovely wee anecdote from that radio interview. And like I say, then you have a picture of Mrs. John O. McNeil, and then we have some of the type songs that she sent to Sam. So we know that she did send him the 10 songs. Another person that Sam would have dealt with quite a lot was John Henry Macaulay from Ballycastle. He contributed at least 21 songs to the series, but probably more. And they included the well-known song, The Outlamas Fair. John was a well-known fiddle player and a songwriter, and he owned the Bog Oak shop in Ballycastle. And if you've ever been to Ballycastle, there's a little plaque, to him above one of the shops in Ann Street. Tom Black was one of Sam's old age pensioners. And so this newspaper article Sam talks about whenever he was asked to go and visit Tom 30 years after delivering him his pension book. And he talks about the state of his house that was very unkept. And I think you can see that from the outside and the vegetation around the outside. And even if you have a look at Tom's trousers, I don't think he cared too much for himself. But Sam talks about his one prized possession, which was his fiddle. He also goes on to say in the article then about how wonderful his memory was for his age, and that they managed to note down several songs, some of that he'd never heard of before. So I like that the newspaper article, the photographs, it all connects together again, and then the songs as well. So I mentioned radio broadcasting. Sam broadcast on the BBC and Radio Éireann. His first broadcast was in May 1925, and that was within the first year of broadcasting activity in Ireland, which I think is really, really interesting and really important. We have an awful lot of broadcast scripts within the collection, which are fascinating. But like I say, I've never actually been able to find a recording, which is disappointing. His last known broadcast then seems to have been in 1946. So he spanned quite a while doing them. And often he would be accompanied by singers during these broadcasts and musicians. This stuff I have up here about William Stevenson, this actually came about. We were doing an event in Garva, and a lady came along and she was like, my father knew about Sam Henry, was connected to him, and she had a scrapbook of stuff of William Stevenson's. So we have those from us doing events in the local community. We've been able to add to the collection, which is really, really nice as well. So the photograph you can see was actually taken outside Sam Henry's house. They'd been there recording for a BBC radio programme, and the photograph was taken outside his house, and that's William Stevenson on the left-hand side. And this is just a couple of photographs of other musicians and singers that Sam would have taken along with some of his radio broadcasts. So Pat Keeley and Michael McBride. I found through going through the collection that one of Sam's biggest regrets was not being able to publish the songs in a book form in his own lifetime. He did gather all the material together and sent a copy to the Library of Congress in Washington, to the National Library of Ireland in Dublin and Belfast Public Libraries. And these are letters that we have in the collection, thanking Sam for sending his copies of the songs over. And then I just wanted to finish up by talking just a little bit before I hand over to John about what we've done with the collection in the museum. So one of the very first things we actually did was we had a programme developed by the Northern Ireland Museums Council, and they gave local museums funding to develop workshops and sessions with under fives. So we had a Sam Henry teddy bear made as a puppet, and the kids loved it. We did sensory storytelling, we would have done songs, and they would have joined in. So we would have done In and Out with the Dusty Bluebells. So they would have done the actions and sang along and stuff. So it was just a really nice way to share Sam's music with such young kids. And then we also received funding from the Esme Fairburne Collections Fund, which is administrated by the Museums Association. And this has really allowed us to share the collection with the local community. So we did stuff with local schools, you can see there. We did stuff with the residents of Rathlin Island, different storytelling groups. We did some bits with a folk music band and just different things. And what we did was we took the collection out to them and we asked them what they were interested in, and they got a chance to handle the collection. So they went through his diaries, they looked at his cameras, they looked at all the photographs. And so you can see that the kids there up at the top, they actually made their own pinhole cameras and photographed where they lived, which was really nice. On Rathlin, they took the photographs that we had of Rathlin Island that Sam had taken, and they named people and told us a little bit about the people that were in the photographs. So they added again to the collection. And then the other thing that funding allowed us to do, probably the most important thing, was it allowed us to complete the documentation of the collection. And this was finished in December there, 2021. So we have documented the entire collection, and as a museum officer, I have to stress how important that is, because if we don't know what's in a collection, we can't use it and we can't share it with anybody. So we're really pleased to have been able to complete that. And I think there's over 16,000 records now on our MODES complete software that we use that's connected to the Sam Henry collection. I did want to mention as well, I've got a good picture of John up there at one of the events he helped us out with, that the BBC did do, while we were doing the Esme Fairburne project, the BBC picked up some stuff on that and did do a documentary on Sam Henry, which was fantastic for us just to raise the profile of the collection and increase its importance and awareness. And then I'm showing the Northern Ireland Community Archive. Now, we have transferred some of the collection onto the archive. It is not easy to access, and we actually had, Steve, you'll be glad to hear this, we were talking to our web developers on Friday, and they're going to try and rectify some of the problems moving forward and with what's already on there. So hopefully it will be easier to access in the future. And then I'm just going to finish with a quote from The Romance of the Revenue. And I just think this sort of sums up a lot of the song collection. So I'll just read out a little bit. So in my contact with the old, who've all now passed away, I had the rare privilege of sharing their folklore and their old songs. And then he just finishes with, he could desire no better epitaph than this. He put an old song in our mouth, our land to magnify. So that is me. I will stop sharing screen. And then if John, you want to jump in here and say anything else?
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. Wonderful. Lovely start to the day. Round of applause for Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So John, you wanted to say, before John starts, don't forget, if you want to ask a question, you have to raise your hand by going down to react.
Right, I'm unmuted now. The thing which has become clear as far as Sarah's presentation is concerned is the absolutely huge multi-dimensional nature of this collection. But it has more dimensions to it even than that, because Sarah mentioned that they were receiving things from members of the public as they went around publicizing the collection. I too have been now in touch with 2 or 3 families who have materials that were collected by relatives from the Sam Henry collection, which above all show the usage in the community of the collection as an aid to tradition. And this is tremendously important as far as I'm concerned. And my only real comment, because I was going to ask Sarah a question about it, Northern Ireland archive is really difficult of access. I know what's in the collection because I've been through it, and I find it quite hard to find what I'm looking for. So I rejoice to say, first of all, that it is online from the Northern Ireland Archive. There are more than 14,000 items there currently. And obviously, as Sarah has said, the 16,000 roughly will be up eventually. And I'm really glad to know that the interface is going to be repaired so that this becomes available. It is a wonderful resource to know what singers thought about songs, to know what singers what kind of relationship the singers had with Sam Henry, and the tremendous outreach that he had, because he also touched on certain of the English and Scottish collectors, like Harry Albino, like the man who collected songs for Country Magazine and so on, Collinson, Francis Collinson. And there are dimension upon dimension in this collection, and I commend it to everybody. And Sarah, thank you very much for a great exposition. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Dick, you got your hand up. You've got to move on fast. Dick, unmute yourself.
I'm free. Okay. Well, I wanted to be sure that everybody who has read the book, Sam Henry's Songs of the People, that was put together by Lonnie Herman, who lived here near me, and was a good friend of mine. I'm afraid to tell you that she died about 2 or 3 months ago in Hawaii, where she was originally from, and her husband was there with her. But anyway, I don't. Is this book distributed very well throughout the British Isles?
I should think most of us have got it.
Good.
Yes.
I hope so.
It's still available, print on demand, from the University of Georgia Press.
Oh, great. Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Dick. Thank you, Dick. Paul Mansfield got his hand up. Hi, Paul.
Hi. Yeah, I just wondered whether, because of Sam's role in a kind of government official capacity, he ever needed other people to go with him to kind of smooth his path, or did he always do his collecting purely on a one-to-one basis?
Well, in that really, he interviewed Jack McBride with him, so I don't know whether he would have taken somebody local along with him sometimes, or somebody that would have known the people in the area. I do know Len Graham did some singing for us at some of our events, and he did talk about some songs that his uncle wouldn't have given to Sam because he was poaching and didn't want Sam around the place. So there was instances and stories of that as well, of course. I don't know if John, if you want to add anything to that.
Mostly he went alone, or sometimes with his daughter, or sometimes with a field group. He was chairman of the Root Nationalist Field Club and Naturalists Field Club, and he himself was a very genial person and able to chat people up to no end. So that, as far as I can gather, he mainly went on his own, but he did get other people in introductions. And there were some people, again, Len Graham, talking to a singer, John McGrath, who gave songs to Sam Henry. John McGrath said, I gave him the money gran pig hunt, and then I hunted him, which is a localism in Northern Ireland for chased him off. So, but
thank you.
Mostly very genial.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm sure the van load of kettles that he took round with him must have helped.
Yes.
Right, no more questions for now, and we're back on time. Thank you again, Sarah and John, for that. And I hope we're going to hear more about Sam Henry in the future. But we're going to move on to Gwilym, who's going to give us
Here I am.
some
I'll share the
wassailing
screen.
stuff.
Can you see that?
We can.
Good. And slideshow
Have
from
you,
the
have you
beginning.
shared your sound as well?
And do the sound as well.
I hope so.
Hang on a sec. More share sound. It's on share sound.
Okay.
So we should be good to go here, Steve.
Yeah,
Everybody.
fine. Off you go.
All right, slideshow from the beginning. Okay, this may seem a rather churlish view of Vaughan Williams and Sharp, considering the huge contribution they both made to English folk song. But in the course of this talk, I'll explain where I'm coming from. I'll just remind you what the Gloucestershire Wassail sounds like. This is the group Chanticleer, just singing one verse of it.
Wassail, wassail, all over the town. Our branch it is white and our hill it is brown. Our bow it is made of the white maple tree. With the wassailing bow we'll drink to thee.
Okay, that just reminds you of the tune. That is based on the version published in 1928 in the Oxford Book of Carols, which had this footnote. Sung by an old person in the county to R. Vaughan Williams. A variant was taken from Mr. William Bayliss of Buckland, Gloss, and verses 5 to 7 from Mr. Isaac Bennett of Little Sudbury, Gloss, by Cecil Sharp. Now, with my suspicious mind and my folk song collector's nose, something just didn't seem to add up. Something didn't seem quite right. So I set about testing the veracity of that footnote. And the first incongruity is that Vaughan Williams didn't actually collect a version of the Wassail in Gloucestershire, but in Herefordshire. So what was that about? I'll return to that point a bit later. But to set the subject in context, let's see what the Gloucestershire Wassail tradition is. We all know that folk songs are no respecters of county boundaries, and a folk song may turn up anywhere from north to south in England or over the border.
Gwilym, can I
Yes.
just say, are you moving slides on?
Not yet, no.
Not yet. Okay. Fine.
I will
Carry on.
do.
Carry on.
I will do. I'm still talking to the first slide.
Fine.
The exception of songs not being mobile is when the song is associated with a particular custom, such as May Day or a sword dance, or in this case, with a wassail custom. And in the case of the Gloucestershire Wassail, now I'll move a slide on, we are talking about a tradition based in a locality. Now this map, and Gloucestershire is in the middle, will show you where versions of the song and the custom have been collected. So we've got a pretty clear grouping of where they turn up. And the song pertains, it's not just a song in isolation, it pertains to a house visiting custom carried out either side of Christmas and the New Year in a relatively small geographical area. You'll see there's one or two outliers there, but mainly in that small area between Cheltenham down into Wiltshire. The concept of the Gloucestershire Wassail had already been noted by several 19th century writers. William Chappell in 1838, Robert Bell in 1857, and William Husk in 1868. And the latter mentioned that it had been sung in the 1790s in Gloucestershire. And both Sharp and Vaughan Williams would probably have been aware of these early versions and probably aware of the concept of a discrete Gloucestershire Wassail. And the custom is a very simple one, very similar to carol singing, consisting of going from house to house, displaying a decorated bowl and singing the Wassail song. Now in the Gloucestershire Wassail custom, whatever else happens, you have to have those two elements, the song and the bowl. And there's a university of practice from village to village. And the song follows a set template, and this pretty well applies to all the collected versions. Starts off with the verse you all know, Wassail all over the town. It mentions a wooden bowl, and it mentions a toast, drink that is, not bread. It mentions, then we have X number of verses with a toast to the master and his animals, which might be an ox or a name like Collie or Broad. And we have what I call an anatomical excursion of the animal. And verses I've seen are cheek, eye, ear, horn, leg, hoof, hip, arm of a cow, I don't know, tail, and sorry folks, in one version is ass. So this is followed by an exhortation to the butler to give them some decent beer, or else he can go to hell, followed by an exhortation to the maidservants to let the wassailers in, not let them stay on the cold stone. And all the red blobs you can see there all have that version. And some later versions have an extra non sequitur verse about an old woman making a barn to keep her cow warm. I suspect that came in later from a different wassail. Nor does the tune vary much from location to location. Some versions have a chorus, some versions have no chorus. Some repeat the last line, and others end up, Wassail, wassail to me jolly wassail, and joy will go with our jolly wassail. I'll come back to that pronunciation later on. These features are not unique to the Gloucestershire wassail song, but the ensemble is very typical of the Gloucestershire wassail, as is the tune. Outside that general area, both tune and words vary. This is why it's atypical, not typical, to find a complete version so out of area. And if we look at Herefordshire, there's Hereford, and the version that Vaughan Williams published was collected, if you can see my cursor, top left of the map. That's roughly where it was collected. So it's slightly incongruous that Vaughan Williams found a version up there. Not impossible, of course, but just seems a little odd. Now, let's have a look at the Oxford Book of Carols version. The tune doesn't come from Gloucestershire itself, but from the little village of Pembridge, a very rural village in northwest Herefordshire. It's only about 1,000 people, and it's up there near towards Hay on Wye. And if you look at Pembridge, it's a very pretty village. It's got some medieval black and white timber houses, and 100 or so years ago, it must have been very picturesque. But we must move on to another person, Ella Mary Leather. Ella Mary Leather lived nearby, near Pembridge, that is. She lived at Leinster, and she took a passionate interest in local songs. She had noted several, especially from gypsy families who came to Hom Farm for the hop picking, but she was not confident of her ability to transcribe the tunes accurately. She asked Vaughan Williams for help, and he did transcribe several of the songs from wax cylinder recordings that she had made. And one of the tunes in her collection is this. Now, it says at the top RVW, Ray Vaughan Williams, obviously, it says Gloucester Wassail Song. But you can see that the tune is not written by somebody who's expert in writing out music. Some of the tails are the wrong way round of the notes. And in bar 4, you've got a slight hiccup there in the timing. So I suspect this is not Vaughan Williams' actual work. If we play through that tune, you'll recognise it as very similar to the tune you heard at the beginning. And this is the more or less the version that went into the Oxford Book of Carols. It's slightly distinctive from other versions, and you've got that sort of jump up to the da da ba ba da 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 bum, which you don't get in a lot of other versions. You've also got these runs of quavers, la da 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 dum, which you don't get in other versions. But you will notice it was sung at the Swan Inn in Pembridge in 1909. Here is the Swan Inn, rather old photo. I'm not sure which building is the Swan Inn, but I'm told it is. Just a sec. Shortly afterwards, Vaughan Williams must have visited the same pub, and he noticed the following set of words: at the inn, presumably the Swan Inn, at Pembridge. And this is a most frustrating manuscript. Presumably he got it from the same singer. You see that the tune written out still has these peculiarities of the funny timing in bar 4, and the notes are the wrong way around. So it's probably not Vaughan Williams' actual writing. But it's a fairly complete version. It's got the first verse, it's got a toast to the ox's eye and tail, it's got the maid verse and the butler verse. But Vaughan Williams helpfully doesn't say who actually sang it. And equally unhelpfully noted, Dykes knows the Herefordshire version. Now, what does he mean by that? Does he mean Dykes also knows the Herefordshire version? Or perhaps somebody not named sang this song, but Dykes knows the Herefordshire version? It's not clear. There was actually Herefordshire Wassail. I think there's one instance in Folklore of Herefordshire by Leather mentioning a Wassail song, but apart from that, it's rather devoid of collected Wassail songs. So is this version from Dykes or not? The question may be partly answered by another manuscript in the Vaughan Williams collection, because in 1912 he visited a Mr. Dykes in Webley, which is very close by, and noted this. Sung by Mr. Dykes, Webley, September 1912. Now, a very, very full version, 11 verses, including the famous backside verse, if you can read verse 8. But the tune here has got very simplified. This is not the Oxford Book of Carols tune. This is a very simple version. Bum 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 da dee dee lum blum da 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 dum da 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 dum, something like that. Right, Dykes, and he also mentioned on the same collecting trip, he said he recorded from a Mr. Jukes. So what was it? Well, Dykes is more likely. There was a local family of Dukes, of Dykes, including 5 brothers, and the surname Dukes is rare in Herefordshire. But the 5 brothers who all lived around Pembridge, there was James, born 1852, Ellis, born 1860, Albert, 1866, Charles, 1869, and Albert, 1873. And this family is a long-established local Herefordshire family with no known Gloucestershire connections. James is the most likely candidate for Vaughan Williams, Mr. Dykes, as James actually lived in Pembridge. And if we look at Vaughan Williams' claim in 1928 that he collected the song from an old Gloucestershire singer, that seems questionable, because, well, apart from the county, James would only have been 57 at the time. Does that count as old? I hope not. Perhaps it did in those days, says my wife. Of course, it's very possible that someone from Gloucestershire brought the song to Pembridge and taught it to the locals. It just seems a little incongruous, and call it my folk song collector's instinct, if you like. Be that as it may, Vaughan Williams published the song in 1913 in a choral arrangement. Now, he published that first tune that we saw, more or less that tune is what he published. And come down to here. Yeah, too far. Sorry. But he published it in a very choral arrangement, very fancy arrangement, which takes a bit of singing. Just play a bit of it. Not a very good recording, apologise for that, but you'll hear it. This is quite a different sort of arrangement. Now you can hear that's quite a fancy arrangement, really, suitable for a choir. Probably not suitable for a folk group. And he included the following verses. He included the eye, horn, tail, butler and maid, and of course the first verse. But meanwhile, in Gloucestershire, about the same time, Sharp was discovering versions. Sharp actually collected 3 versions in Gloucestershire. 1907, 1909 and 1913. The 1907 version from Isaac Bennett is a pretty full version. It's got most of the tour of the bovine, as I say, and it's got the butler and maid. And a couple of years later, William Bayliss, that's a photo of William Bayliss, taken by Cecil Sharp. Rather shorter version, eye, ear, arm, hasn't got the butler or the maid verse. And later on, he got a 1-verse version, just the first verse from William Sparrow at Pembridge. Sorry, at Campbell. Let's have a look at the geography of that. The Buckland version, Buckland is a little bit off the map for the general Gloucestershire Wassails. It's that red dot up near Broadway in Worcestershire, top right of my map. So it's not where you'd really expect to find a Gloucestershire Wassail. Campbell is down near Cirencester. It's that blob there below the word Cirencester. That's fine. And Little Sodbury, it's one of these blobs. I think it's that one. So that's pretty much right in Wassail country there. Right, let's have a look. Now, what we want to know, yeah. Now back to the, right, come back to that slide. I'm going to go back to the Oxford Book of Carols version with a footnote. And just to remind you what it said, sung by an old person in the county, i.e. Gloucestershire, to R. Vaughan Williams. A variant was taken by Mr. William Bayliss at Buckland, Gloss, and 5 to 7 from Mr. Isaac Bennett from Little Sodbury. Well, Ray Vaughan Williams collected the tune. Well, question mark, was it him or was it Ella Mary Leather? Sung by an old person, well, we've already addressed that. Probably one of the Dykes brothers, and they were all under 60 at the time. In the county of Gloucestershire? Apparently not. Verses 5 to 7 are from Bennett. Well, Bennett's verse 5 is about Broad and his long tail, and the Oxford Book of Carols is about Collie, so a slight editing there. The last 2 verses of Bennett's version and the Oxford Book of Carols version are pretty standard, but not word for word. The question is, why did Vaughan Williams bother to do a composite version when he had all the verses he needed from his own collecting? Was it, my own theory is that it was just to pay homage to Sharp's collecting. So what have we got so far? Vaughan Williams does seem guilty of some inaccurate housekeeping and editing in his manuscripts when editing the 1928 Oxford Book of Carols. And did not the collectors realise that the song was not a standalone song, but part of a whole custom? Were they not more curious about it? To be fair to them, much more is known now about the custom than in the 1920s, as many more versions have come to light from recent fieldwork and search in manuscripts. So there's a much more complete version of the whole custom than Sharp and Vaughan Williams had at the time. Also, to be fair, very few collectors, even recent ones, have asked questions like, how and where did you learn the song and from whom? So that's an omission, if you like. Secondly, and this is the version collected in recent years, the pronunciation of Wassail is nearly always Wassail, or sometimes Wassail. But Wassail was very, very general around the Stroud Valley, and certainly in Old Sodbury, down that area, it would have been pronounced Wassail. In fact, a version was collected there in the 70s from the same area with the same tune that Sharp collected, pronounced Wassail. We don't know how they pronounced it in rural Herefordshire, but certainly Mr. Bennett would have pronounced it Wassail or similar. Did Sharp not hear that, or did he not want to hear that? So the lesson from this little presentation is that you shouldn't always take previous scholarship as gospel and for granted, and perhaps from time to time you should test it and come up with slightly different answers. So I rest my case. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Gwilym. Very interesting, but very detailed. I'll have to think about it. Conrad, you've got your hand up. Can we try and keep the questions short if we can, please? Conrad?
I'll work it short. Thanks to Gwilym for his inspiration. He's been wonderfully helpful and inspiring for me for all my work, and he's got to keep that up now. Doing great. The Wassail song is there in many, many ways. There are so many ways to look at it, and never enough time to talk about it. But the Wassail is going into the future as well. The custom strand is going right into the new work. And the interesting thing is that they're not giving up or adulterating the lyrics. They're taking old lyrics, pretty much accurate, shortening them, making them longer, stretching them out some, but the thread of the tradition is continued. If you look at the song by Rolamp, Wassail, that's a very good one. I'm still trying to transcribe it, but there are many, many levels. It's a different style, but you got to get beyond the style to what they're doing to manipulate the tune. It's not sort of parody, it's more deconstruction, reconstruction. But again, thanks again to Gwilym and also even John Molden, who sent me the songs to the people years ago.
Thank you, Conrad. Any more questions or comments for Gwilym?
Just as a follow-up on that, I think the old house-to-house custom in Gloucestershire probably died out with the Second World War, so far as I gather. It sort of lingered on till then, but I don't think much happened after the war. And of course, we all know that Wassail now is not Christmas and the New Year, but January, and it's all to do with apple trees and orchards. So the old type of Wassail has gone pretty well, except in a few places like Bodmin where they do keep it up as a house-to-house.
It's sort of house to house, and then you wonder, why are they going house to house? I like the idea of crossing the border and the threshold between aristocracy and ordinary people. That's the time where you can go in there and have some food and get warm, and not any other time. But the traveling custom does happen in America. A good bit. We had it in Laurel, Maryland. I don't know if you know Laurel, because they did it every year for decades, just up to recent times. And it is around, but you have to get people to accept the fact that they have to have fun going out in the cold. And nobody seems to think about that anymore. It's all too politically incorrect. Thanks again.
Thank you, Conrad. John Roberts got his hand up. Last question for Gwilym, please. John?
Yeah, I really appreciate all Gwilym's work on the Gloucestershire Wassail. I just wanted to point out that Chambers' Book of Days has a fairly complete text from around he published, I think, in the late 1860s. It's identified as a Gloucester Wassail. It has the various animals identified as horses or cows, and it's quite interesting. But thank you, Gwilym, that's great. And I love seeing the manuscript. Was it the Dykes manuscript, which has that broken tempo thing in the chorus?
That's all online, of course, at the Williams Memorial Library. You can find it there.
Thanks.
Good.
Great. Thanks, everybody, especially to Gwilym. Can we move on swiftly to Tom? Tom Spiers. It's his first time with us, I think. First time speaking, anyway. Hello, Tom.
Hello. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Margaret Bennett for inviting me to give a talk to your forum, and to yourself, Steve, for accepting it. But we'll see. Hopefully you'll all understand my accent, which is normally a bit broader than I'm doing just now. But I'm sure we'll get through it. Probably a lot of you didn't know Peter, so I'm going to give you a wee bit of background on him. He was a great friend of mine and a mentor, of course. He was a good 10 years older than me. And it's difficult to believe that December just past was the 25th anniversary of his death. I mean, he died very young, just 60 years old. Anyway, I'll put on the slide now. And let's do this one. Okay.
Put on the sound.
Yep. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Right. Peter was born, he was actually born in England in 1936 in London. He spent some time as a child at his mother's hometown of Aberdeen, and his formative years in Newcastle. So he'd actually developed a Geordie accent before he came to Aberdeen. In the mid-1950s, he returned to Aberdeen to go to university, and he played at cornet there in a jazz band while he was at university before he discovered folk music, which is actually, looking at a number of stories, quite a lot of people found that way into folk music through jazz. Unfortunately, Peter's studies at university were interrupted by national service, but the army were actually quick to recognise his strengths, because he was very quickly elevated to the rank of Field Marshal in charge of the long jump pit at Fort George. That's a joke, by the way. In 1962, Peter was a founder member of the Aberdeen Folk Club along with Arthur Argo. And sorry? Oh yeah, that's okay. That's my daughter keeping me right, because I missed a bit. He's a founder member of the Folk Club in Aberdeen. Now, there was a number of talented enthusiasts started the club there, and between them they actually ran an excellent chapbook magazine, which was sponsored by the Scottish Federation of Folk Clubs. Okay, if you found that, yeah. Now, Peter was a regular contributor to that, with articles, reviews, songs, complete with music and in-depth notes. Arthur Argo, again, I don't know how many of you knew Arthur, so I've put a picture up there of him. He was actually the driving force for starting the club in Aberdeen. And he was the grandson of Gavin Gregg. So it was through Arthur that Peter found out about the Greg Duncan folk song collection. The manuscripts at that time were held in King's College Library in Aberdeen. And Peter made many trips back and forth to the library to study the manuscripts. He was so impressed with the work of Greg and Duncan and by the expeditions of Hamish Henderson and others from the School of Scottish Studies, he decided to have a go at collecting himself. So he bought one of the very early portable tape recorders. Some of you may remember them, the Philips, which looked just like a transistor radio with little spools on top of it. It made passable recordings, but not very good. A few years later, he graduated to the Ewer Report, which made much better recordings. Now, Peter's a teacher, and one of his first teaching posts was Peterhead Academy. I don't know if you're familiar with the geography of the northeast of Scotland, but Peterhead was, and still is, a very big fishing port in the northeast, just north of Aberdeen. And he asked his staff, pupils and parents if they knew anyone who sang old songs. And he got quite a few leads that way, which branched out into more singers. He was very likeable, which was a useful asset for getting him past the front door. But the real key to his success as a collector was that he didn't talk down to people. He treated everyone with respect, regardless of their social circumstances, and was always welcomed back for subsequent visits. To give you an idea how Peter thought collectors should behave, I'm going to play an extract from a talk he gave at Sheffield University in 1983, which was called Fieldwork in Folklore Conference, and it was organised by a young whippersnapper called Ian Russell. His paper was called Collecting in the Community, and I've called this extract The Incident of the Hairball.
I think there's one thing that has rather been missed out that I would like to draw attention to, and that's the point of view of the actual informant, the person who's giving you information. And I'm a bit wary of the emphasis that's been put on the collector and not upon the person who's being collected from, and the interaction between the two. Seems to me the first thing when a collector goes, he has to present himself in some way. He has to represent his reasons for collecting. Now, in my area, an academic reason, I mean, not a necessarily stated academic reason, but an implied academic reason, a sort of academic interest, is a very good reason. And as a school teacher, it tends to be accepted that I would be interested in these sorts of things, local history, local matters, and that sort of thing. So that's quite a good way of presenting oneself. The only thing here to beware of is presenting oneself as an expert, because that, in the northeast of Scotland, that inevitably invites deflation. I remember I was caught this way once. I was introduced to a singer, and I didn't pose as an expert, but the person who'd introduced me had written to him and told him that I was an expert. And I was welcomed, and the first thing he did was to go to a glass case, and he produced what turned out to be the hairballs from the stomach of a cow, and asked me to identify this. And I've never seen one before. I failed. I failed that test, but and I just took it up from there and expressed interest in his background, and we got on famously from then on. But he had to establish that we were talking as equals, and I think that's really quite important.
Okay, and I think those of you who have done a bit of collecting will probably relate to that. I should also point out, of course, that Peter wasn't alone in his search for song carriers, with people like Pete Shepherd in Fife and Geordie McIntyre in Glasgow and a number of others in Scotland doing the same sort of thing in their areas. The interesting thing about those three I mentioned, they were very good at sharing recordings with each other as well, very unselfishly. After Peter's very early death, and surprisingly early death, Marion, who had always been supportive of his recording expeditions, she couldn't bear to see all his hard work going to waste, and she asked me if I would digitise the recordings so they could be shared with anyone who was interested. It took a while, but was well worth it. On the accompanying notes for the collection, this is what she wrote. And I think you can see for that she was very aware of Peter's wish that the material he'd collected should be shared out among anyone who was interested, basically. Now, the recordings have been passed on to many individuals and to institutions who expressed an interest, including the School of Scottish Studies, Elphinstone, Cecil Sharp House, Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, the Smithsonian, many others. Many of the recordings are now to be found on the Kisteritch's website as well. And most, if not all, from my earlier chat with Steve, most of them are now indexed by Steve Froud as well. Peter made a lot of, I should have said that his main recording period was the 1960s and the 1970s, and he made some excellent recordings of Lizzie Higgins and Jimmy McBeath during that period, but you can easily listen to those on CDs or online. So in the short time we've got, I'm going to skip those and let you hear some of what I think was his great finds who were previously not recorded. So here's a brief index of the singers in the collection. A lot of the names you'll recognise there, but I'm sure there's a lot you don't recognise. I'm just trying to see if John Molden is not mentioned there, so I'll have to put that right for the next time. But you know, he had a real mixture of people, and as well as recording mainly here in the northeast of Scotland, he did make a trip over to Ireland again in the 1960s and got some very nice recordings there as well, which are all on the collection. He was actually, I should say as well, Peter was a very keen photographer, and I'm sure that he made or took pictures of all the people he collected. Unfortunately, by the time Marion got round to giving me the collection, his son had cleared out the attic, and a lot of the tapes and I'm sure the pictures as well disappeared during that period. But anyway, one source Peter used for finding singers was old folks' homes, as well as from leads given by his pupils, etc. He used to go around a lot of the old folks' homes in Aberdeen and just ask if there was any of the residents there that knew old songs, and he got quite a few very interesting recordings. But in one of these visits to an old folks' home, he came across a lady called Daisy Chapman. And I'm going to play you a track of hers later, but again, because I've got my daughter sitting here trying to keep me right, she's pointing out I've missed a whole chunk here. So I'm going to take a step back and tell you that one of the favourites from that list I just showed you, a favourite of mine, was a woman called Lottie Buchan, who came from Peterhead, and here she is singing the Dowie Dens of Yarrow.
It's 3 slushy slow, and 3 withdrew, and 3 he left in Yarrow. Her brother John stepped in behind and pierced his body thorough. O father, ye his 7 sons, ye may wed them all tomorrow, but you'll ne'er wed me to a fair flower than the pluming lad in Yarrow. Oh, mother, mother, make my bed, and make it long and narrow. My love has died for me today, and I'll die for him tomorrow.
I think you'll agree she had a really beautiful voice, and she had a number of songs like that. And I'm going to play another one of her. This one's called Bonnie Buckenhaven, which is a very unusual one. Very short as well.
Bonnie Buchenhaven, heaven, heaven, Bonnie Buchenhaven, a new tartiole. Jokey got a sixpence, a sixpence, a sixpence, Jokey got a sixpence, the tar or yol. Dirty brute drank it, he drank it, he drank it, the dirty brute drank it, and never tartiole. Tartiole again, yol again, yol again, tartiole again, Bonnie Buchenhaven.
Right. That one is quite unusual because, funnily enough, in the northeast here, there wasn't all that many songs, relatively speaking, came out of the fishing industry. Lots from the farming communities, lots from the whaling industry, but not a lot from the fishing industry. So that was quite a nice one. Now, I'm going to get on to, as I mentioned earlier, that he met Daisy Chapman when he was going round old folks' homes in Aberdeen. And Daisy wasn't a resident, but she was also going round old folks' homes singing to the residents. And Peter just loved her singing, invited her along to the Aberdeen Folk Song Club first of all, and then after that got bookings for her in many of the other folk clubs and festivals. And she travelled all over the UK, and there was a great CD put out of her by just trying to think, Rod Stradling, who made a terrific CD of recordings taking Daisy at various clubs and festivals. About half of the tracks on there were actually recorded by Peter Hall, and I'm going to play one here now to let you hear, because a lot of traditional singers, I'm sure you've come across this yourself, a lot of traditional singers have two voices. They've got a presentation voice, and they've got their natural voice that they'll use if you're sitting round beside the fire with them or sitting round the table with them, and they're very different. This is a track that Rod used on the CD I'm going to play first, which is Daisy in presentation mode.
Beside again the Avon side, where gently flows the rolling tide, a bonny lass passed by my side, and looks to me and smiled. Oh, but she was a beauty bright, that ever trod the braes again. I could he spend tally long night, we had her on either side.
And as you can hear there, she's singing out for the audience, but she's also making sure her pronunciation is much clearer than it would normally be if she was singing in her natural accent. Now here she is, again, just same couple of verses, singing, sitting at her fireside, relaxed in her own home.
As I came in the Avon side, where gently flows the rolling tide, a bonny lass passed by my side, her looked to me and smiled. She was a maid of beauty breath, that ever trod the braes again. I could have spent a long night with her on either side.
I don't know if you agree, but I think that's far superior to the version used on the CD. I know why Rod would have used it, because it probably was clearer for a bigger audience. But I think our voice at home, our natural voice, is so much nicer. one of the things I found as well, of course, as you'd heard there, working through to digitise Peter's tapes, was the number of traditional singers who either had budgies or chiming clocks, which I believe by the time I'd finished that, I thought that was the true decision in whether a singer was traditional or not, whether he had a chiming clock or a budgie. Now, the next singer I'm going to let you hear was one that Peter collected way back in 1965, and she was born in 1875. She learned all her songs from her mother and grandmother by 1900, and Peter collected her in 1965 when she was 90 years old. So as you can imagine, her voice and memory were failing then. So it's not, if you want to be entertained, she would not be the one you'd choose to listen to. But if you're really interested in the kind of repertoire that singers of her generation had, then she's a great example. Here's just her repertoire of fragments, really. She didn't have any full versions, but fragments of child ballads, which was quite amazing. And I'm going to, she'd actually, there's two there, she had a lovely version for the tune that she used on, I'm looking the wrong bit here, Barbara Allen and the Dowie Denza Yarrow. She used the same tune in both, and it was just such a hypnotic tune. And I have to admit that I borrowed it from her. That's the tune I use for the Dowie Denza Yarrow now, and always attributed to her. One of the other things I enjoyed listening to these recordings of Peter's, and particularly with singers like Jessie MacDonald, was you did hear different tunes that you hadn't heard before, and very often different sets of words. So I'm going to play just a very short clip now of her singing part of the Twa Sisters, if you listen carefully to hear what she's singing here.
Oh, hateful Gerald, Jemmy hung up to dry, and he made a fiddle to have a collarbone. He made a fiddle to have a collarbone to swine swing sabony on.
Now, a very common ballad, and lots of versions about the miller finding her drowned and pulling her out. But it's the only one I'd ever heard where they say, where anybody said they pulled her out and hung her up to dry. You know, it just seems such a rough thing to do. And then what I found very interesting was looking through when I came to the section where Pete Shepherd had sent Peter recordings. Pete had actually recorded a family of travellers in Fife called the Whites, and here's them singing, or one of them singing the same verse of the Twa Sisters.
There took the maiden, he hung her up to dry. The worst three fiddlers fastened by the swan seems to.
So here's Fife travellers. What's that, from where she lived away up in Macduff, up in the Moray Firth, singing that, pulled her out and hung her up to dry. And here's travellers down in Fife singing exactly the same thing. So although, as far as I make out, somebody might correct me if I'm wrong, but I've never seen that exact set of words in a printed version. But it obviously was being used among the travelling community. So not an error after all. So really that's all in the time I've got. That's all I want to say just now. Peter recorded a lot of people who sang very interesting songs, including ballads, but none of them considered themselves to be singers, and most of them, in fact all of them, had never heard the term folk song. They were just singing the songs that they knew. The recordings can be difficult to listen to if you just want to be entertained, but are a hugely important source for those who want to hear tunes, words, styles from an earlier generation when singing among families and communities was common and cherished. One of the most important lessons I learned from Peter was don't ignore a song because it's incomplete or doesn't have a good tune. If there's something about it you like, play around with it, repair it, give it new life. Now, Peter's collection of recordings in conjunction with the Greg Duncan collection gives ample opportunity to do that and to repair songs that only bits remain, maybe a verse here, a verse there, and quite often he is a recording of someone singing that in the 1960s. So the pair of them together has been a very useful source for me going round and repairing songs. So that's all I want to say. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to give it a try.
Great, thank you so much, Tom. That was really fascinating. Can we also say thank you for Tom's daughter, who's not on the screen there, but who is keeping things running very nicely. Thank you, Tom's daughter. There you are. Thank you. I was very interested, Tom, what you were saying about the two voices of Daisy Chapman, and various people on the chat have said the same. And I think we should do this with some other singers because it really is quite stark, isn't it, the difference?
Well, it is, and I mean, singers like Jeannie Robertson did it as well, and Lizzie. A lot of the traditional singers, as soon as they stepped onto a stage, they felt they had to make an effort, if you want to be clearer. But Daisy Chapman, to my mind, was the one who showed the clearest difference between the two styles of singing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you demonstrated that very well. Vic Smith has his hand up. Hello, Vic.
Yes. First of all, could I thank Tom for some 15 years ago making this CD, this DVD of all Peter's songs to me. And I have to say, it sits on my desk all the time, particularly at the moment when I'm working through recordings that I made of Cameron and Jane Turriff in 1971, and I'm sort of doing a lot of comparing of their songs with some of the songs here. And I noticed in your list, and it's on here as well, that one of the people that Peter collected from was the person that Jane calls Blind Robin. And I think that's Blind Robin Hutchinson, isn't it?
Blind Robin Hutchinson, yeah.
Right, well, he lived diagonally opposite her in Gavell Street, Fetter Angus. And when I come across a song that's on Peter's recordings here and compare them with Blind Robin's, they are almost always the same tune as Jane used. And although she nearly always sings songs slower than he did, but sometimes it's exactly the same pitch as Blind Robin, and I'll find that really fascinating. Obviously, they must be together a lot. I mean, the whole street was full of great singers. You know, Christina Stewart lived across the road, and Lucy Stewart was just down the road. So it was a fantastic place for traditional songs in just one street in one little village. Yeah. But I'm working through getting these digitized because I've had a man called Steve Roud bullying me, saying I had to get all this done. So I'd like him to know that I actually am working on it at the present. That's all I want to say.
If you send me your postal address, Vic, I'll send you the updated tracks that weren't on that original copy I gave you.
Right. I'll do that very willingly.
Aye,
thank you very much.
His son found a few more tapes in the attic that I hadn't got in the original batch.
Great.
Thank you, Tom, for making those available to everybody. Steve Gardam.
Yeah, hi, Tom.
That was a great talk. Thanks very much. I wasn't aware of Peter Hall's work at all there, particularly the stuff from Peterhead. What I'd like to ask is, you might not be able to answer this now, but you might do in the future. Is there any mention or relationship of what he was collecting in Peterhead to the stuff that was reputedly collected by Peter Buchan in Peterhead? I just wondered if there was any connection, or if he had any sort of mention of Peter Buchan that you've come across in his collection.
No, I assume you're talking about Peter Buchan much earlier.
Yeah.
There was another Peter Buchan who was a poet, but
right,
no, he wasn't getting into that kind of detail. He was really just interested in finding songs that folk were singing. But from what I know of what he did collect, Peter Buchan's versions of child ballads and things seemed to be quite different to anybody else's. And I would say the versions that Peter recorded, even the fragments from folk like Jesse Murray and so on, would have been more towards the versions that we would all know rather than the Peter Buchan versions.
Yeah.
But I'm sure he didn't deliberately try to find connections there, no.
Okay, thank you.
And last question from Mossy.
Yeah.
That was quick, Mossy. I think we've lost. Oh, right. Start again, Mossy. We haven't got anything from you.
Ah, fine. I was interested in the recording that you played from the Fieldwork in Folklore conference. Is that is the full recording available publicly, or should one apply directly to Ian Russell?
To be honest, I don't know. I got that. I got a recording of that from Bob Blair. I don't know if Bob's in any of the wee boxes today or not. Who got it in turn from another friend of his who had been at the conference. So it was quite a poor recording, which I spent a lot of hours tidying up. But I don't know, to be honest, whether there is a full recording of that available or not.
I don't know either, but I mean, there are people on the call here that were at the conference. Derek, do you know?
I'm sure I was at the conference. And I was just going to say, and Doc's put it in the chat at the bottom, that if anybody was going to be recording it, it would have been Doc Rowe.
Right. Is Doc with us?
He is.
Yes, and I just put on the chat that I have a complete set of the recordings of that weekend.
Is there any way is there any way they could be made available?
Yeah, I'm in the throes of digitizing most of those and Folklore Society material at the moment. So yes, we can do that. I may have to get clearance from the various speakers, but quite a few of them have passed on, sadly.
Yeah.
But Derek and I are still here.
That was a particularly important conference, wasn't it? I remember. I don't think I was there, but it would.
There were several folklore fieldwork in folklore conferences that Ian organised.
Yeah.
All in Sheffield around about that time.
Right, it's time, ladies and gentlemen, for us to wind up. Exactly 12:30. We're on time. Thank you very much for our speakers today. Give them a round of applause, everybody. That was really good. Yep. Sunday afternoon tradition. And we will see you all again, I hope, in 2 weeks' time. And we'll see you also at the Broadside Day conference on the 12th of February. Cheerio. See you all again. Bye-bye.